The Zephyrian spaceport was a cacophony of noise and activity, a melting pot of species from across the galaxy. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices and the hum of 1,000 different languages, punctuated by the occasional roar of a starship's engines. In a dimly lit corner of the port's most notorious bar, two weary travelers sat hunched over their drinks, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the holographic display above their table. Zorax, a Zephyrian merchant with a reputation for cunning and resourcefulness, had just returned from a long journey ferrying goods between the nearby systems. His blue-scaled skin glistened under the bar's pulsing lights, and his eyes, one golden and one silver, darted around the room, always on the lookout for potential opportunities or threats. Across from him sat Gettr, a Zellarian pilot known throughout the sector for his skill and daring. He had seen more than his share of the galaxy's wonders and horrors, and it showed in the jagged scar that ran from his temple to his jawline, a souvenir from a run-in with a particularly nasty band of Korathan pirates. As they sipped their drinks, a luminescent green concoction for Zorax, a dark, smoky liquid for Gettr, the pilot leaned in close, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Have you heard the rumors about the new species making waves on the galactic stage? The ones they call humans?" Zorax shook his head, his interest piqued. He prided himself on staying informed about the latest developments in the galaxy, but this was the first he'd heard of these humans. "Can't say that I have," he admitted, setting his drink down on the table. "What's so special about them?" Gettr's eyes darted around the bar as if checking for eavesdroppers. In a place like this, you never knew who might be listening in. "They're not like any species we've encountered before," he said, his voice barely audible over the din of the bar. "They are newcomers, relatively speaking. Only achieved interstellar travel a few decades ago. But already they've gained a reputation that's spreading faster than a warp drive malfunction." Zorax leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "A reputation?" he scoffed. "For what exactly? They can't be that advanced if they are so new to the galactic community." Gettr shook his head, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's just it," he said, tapping a finger on the table for emphasis. "They're not advanced, not in the ways that matter. Their technology is primitive, their weapons laughable compared to what most species wield. But they have something else, something that's far more dangerous." He paused, taking a long sip of his drink, letting the anticipation build. Zorax found himself leaning forward, drawn in by the pilot's words. Around them, the bar pulsed with life, but it all faded into the background as Gettr spoke again. "They're masters of psychological warfare," he said, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "They get inside your head, turn your own thoughts against you. They'll make you doubt everything you believe in, question the very foundations of your society. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late." Zorax frowned, trying to wrap his mind around the concept. He'd encountered plenty of species with advanced mental abilities, telepaths, empaths, even a few who could manipulate emotions. But this sounded like something else entirely. "But how?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "How can a species so new to the galactic stage wield such power?" Gettr shrugged, a gesture of helpless resignation. "No one knows for sure," he admitted. "Some say they've honed their skills over centuries of conflict on their own world, that they've turned manipulation and deception into an art form. Others believe they have some kind of innate ability, a power to read the desires and fears of any sentient being like an open book." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. The bar seemed to fade away around them until it felt like they were the only two beings in the universe. "But there's something else," Gettr said, his eyes haunted. "Something that's been bothering me ever since I first heard the rumors. something that reminds me of an old story, a legend that's been passed down among my people for generations. Zorax's eyes widened, his curiosity piqued. He'd always been fascinated by the myths and legends of other species, the stories they told to make sense of the vast, unpredictable galaxy around them. "What kind of legend?" he asked, his own voice hushed. Kultar's gaze grew distant, as if he were looking back across the vast expanse of time and space. "It's a tale of a forgotten race," he began, his words taking on a haunting cadence. "A species that once terrorized the galaxy with their mind games and psychological manipulation. They were like phantoms, striking from the shadows and vanishing without a trace. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted, but the mere mention of their name was enough to strike fear into the hearts of even the seasoned diplomats." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. Zorax could feel the weight of the pilot's words, the depth of the fear and awe they inspired. "They called them the Unseen," Kultar continued, "and they were the stuff of nightmares. Some say they could take on the form of their enemies, walk among them undetected. Others claimed they could reach into the minds of their victims, twisting their perceptions of reality until they could no longer trust their own senses." Zorax felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of unease that he couldn't quite shake. He'd heard stories like this before, whispered in the darkest corners of spaceports and trading posts across the galaxy. But he'd always dismissed them as mere superstition, the ramblings of primitive species who couldn't comprehend the true nature of the universe. Now, though, with Kultar's words ringing in his ears, he wasn't so sure. "What happened to them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Unseen, I mean." Kultar shook his head, a gesture of uncertainty. "No one knows for sure," he admitted. "The legends say they vanished as suddenly as they appeared, leaving behind only the shattered remnants of the civilizations they had destroyed. Some believe they were wiped out by a coalition of species that finally banded together to defeat them. Others think they simply moved on, finding new hunting grounds beyond the edges of known space." He looked up, his eyes haunted by the weight of the knowledge he carried. "But now, with the arrival of the humans, I can't help but wonder if the old stories were true after all. If perhaps the Unseen didn't vanish but simply went into hiding, biding their time until they were ready to strike again." Zorax sat back in his chair, his mind reeling with the implications of Kultar's words. He had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to see through the superstitions and myths that so many other species clung to. But now, faced with the prospect of a new species that seemed to embody the very qualities of the Unseen, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the noise of the bar. "How can we protect ourselves from a threat like this?" Kultar sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "I don't know," he admitted, his shoulders slumping. "The humans are still a mystery, their true capabilities and intentions unknown. Some say we should reach out to them, try to establish diplomatic ties before it's too late. Others believe we should prepare for the worst, shore up our defenses, and hope that we can weather the storm." He looked down at his drink, as if seeking answers in its murky depths. The bar seemed to press in around them, the noise and chaos of the spaceport suddenly overwhelming. "But one thing is certain," Kultar said, his voice barely audible over the din. "We cannot afford to underestimate them. The humans may be new to the galactic stage, but they have already shown that they are not to be trifled with. And if the old stories are true, if they are indeed the heirs of the Unseen,